Hello. Now I'm going to talk about the code line policy patterns for proposed by for software configuration management, proposed by Steve Berzuk and Appleton. And I find it really interesting, and I think that the insight you can get from these patterns is a trade-off between two different forces, stability and progress. So the idea is that you have your code line, and the point about this code line, the main point about this code line, is in terms of what is the level of stability or progress that you want in your code line. And the main idea is that the stability and the level of stability and progress can change during your project duration, and can also change from code line to code line. So what is stability and what is progress? Stability means the amount, the percentage. Okay, if you want to measure stability, is the percentage of tests that pass. So if it is more stable, it means that you trust it. You trust you have higher trust on the quality of the code line. So basically more tests. So if you really have a good code coverage, more tests pass. Okay. If you have progress, it means that the amount of changes that are occurring in the code line is very high. So people are actively changing the code line frequently, probably working with the idea of continuous integration. Okay, so these two aspects, stability and progress, may be in conflict, because if you want stability, probably the type of work you want to do is basically to remove bugs. So increase the amount of tests that pass, the number of tests that pass. If you go for progress, you really want to have more features in your code line. So you have the implementation of more features in the code line. So these two forces, basically these two opposite forces, is something that when you are managing the project, you're managing the software configuration, doing software configuration management of your project, you need to decide what is more relevant in each point of the project. For instance, if you want to deliver, well, if you want to deliver something, you need to go for a more stable code line. So you will say to people, hey, do not implement new features, remove bugs. Okay, and so that's the trade-off you need to deal with. So these are the patterns. We already talked about mainline and active development line. So mainline is the code line where people look at to say what is the status of the project. So where is basically is the reference line that everybody looks at and says, okay, our project is in this state. Okay. Then an active development line is just a pattern that tells you that mainline should be a place of activity, so that you have continuous activities changing the code in the main line, and working towards continuous integration, so that basic is the you actively interact with the main line, and you need to achieve this to support this you need to use tests, so to verify the quality of the main line that is being changed. Then what happens is now they propose a set of other patterns that deal with create specific code lines with very specific goals. Okay, and these goals also relate with variations in the code line policy. So what are these goals? Is if something happens in the project that requires that some of the people work towards a different object that other part of the team, so some people needs to fix bugs and makes code more stable, while other people needs to implement new features. What you're going to do is just you create a code line so that part of the people work towards that goal in that code line. So what is the idea here? The idea is that, for instance, suppose you are doing normal development and you have a release plan for 1 month. So what you need to do, you need to start preparing this release. Have already decided how many features will be in that release. So what we're gonna do? Well, you can just say to people, hey, in the main line, let's just debug the main line and have a more stable main line. But what happens is that after a while, people have nothing to do because basically you don't need to have all these people debugging. So what these people can do? So the idea is to create a new code line that is a release prepare code line where you actually start stabilizing your code for that features. And then the other people can continue working on the main line, on the active development line, implementing new features probably for the next release, not this release. Okay? So what happens here? So these you continue in the main line, you continue with some level of progress, and here you go towards stability. Well, when you introduce more code lines, and maybe we'll discuss this as well, you always introduce complexity. Now, every time you remove a bug here, you need basically to synchronize there. You can do both two ways. One way is just to merge these back there, so you synchronize the code, or do cherry picks of specific fixes you have done. But this is nice to say, but in reality, very easily it becomes very difficult to synchronize them both. Okay, because the code starts to diverge, and as soon as you start having several code lines, you should be really careful whether actually the cost of merge is high. And one property is that if you do not do frequently synchronizations of code, if you don't merge your code frequently, then the cost just increases. Okay, is exponential, the cost of solving the conflicts when you merge. Okay, but then suppose that after 1 month you deliver the code. So this release prepare code line disappears. But what you're going to do? Do you want to keep the information about what is the code that you release? Yes, because look, your main line is already with other features. But suppose now that the client starts using this code and he just realizes that they have a bug. Well, if they have a bug, they have a problem, and the problem needs to be fixed, and you cannot fix it there. So you create a release line that contains the code that you deliver to the client. And now you're gonna do the fixes there. So this is a code line that you go for more stable code line, and this is already stable code line that maybe is there only for the bug fixes. Okay, and of course, when you do a bug fix there, you need basically to fix it there as well with all the cost and complexity that it may have. Then another situation is that you are progressing here, okay, but you have an idea about something to do. So you want to experiment with something, and you want to experiment in a way that maybe you want to have versions, and so you have an history of your experiments. So you want to do something that is disruptive, and basically it has requires an higher progress. Okay, so in this case, what you do is that you create a code line that has a private version code line, and you just do there whatever you want. Okay, if at the end you do not like, you don't need to synchronize, you just delete this code line. So it's a code line which principal goal is basically to do something that is completely disruptive, that you not be comfortable to do there. So you do it there, and then you may just delete it at the end. Finally, you have the task branch. It is where what you do is you decide to do, for instance, an architectural change of your code. So these may become the future system, okay? But this is really just not adding features. This is basically doing deep changes to the code. So what you do, you create a code line where people work that while development continues there. Probably you have more features there, but since you put some of the resources here, progress will not that big there. And in some point, maybe you hope that these will replace the active mainline, and it will become the active mainline. But this is really disruptive. Again, as soon as you have this, you have a lot of cost to merging what is happening there and what is happening there, because they start diverging. And we'll talk about some other patterns or other perspective proposed by Martin Fowler that talks about these continuous integration and the cost of using this kind of stuff. But what I think that is interesting about this is always thinking about stability and progress, and then you will can reason about what's happening. But never forget that when you start having a lot of code lines, you are, and if these code lines exist for a long time apart, then you have really difficult costs to merging the code. Okay. So just to finish, to discuss a little bit how this applies in different contexts, because these Steve Berzuc's patterns were from the 2000 or something, okay? And a lot of things happened, and you will see different models. And there's one model that is very famous, that is the Git branching model. And the idea is that, probably the active mainline is called develop, where things are happening. You create features, branches. So featured branches is basically when you implement a task, you just create a branch, and then you just integrate the branch with the development line when you need. Okay. So it's a feature branch approach that I will talk as well soon. Okay, and so it's a bit, Steve Berzuc actually do not refer this way, because basically what it does is that you have an active mainline, you do it in the active mainline, so it differs on that aspect. But you have the release branch, so that is similar. Okay, actually this release branch probably is more close to prepare to release. You have the master, where you have the versions, so probably close to the release. And then you have hotfixes branches where you do the fixes. So this is a model where we have a lot of branches. And what is interesting about this is that you should always be aware when you do things. You keep in software, you keep learning, and there's no panacea, okay, about things. And now there's a reflection by the author that says, well, if you read his reflection, so he wrote this, he proposed this Git flow in 2010. It was very famous, a lot of use. Then now in 2020, he changed. He wrote here something and says that maybe you may need this type of model if you have a lot of versions in your code, but if possible, go always for something simpler, okay? And he finished with something that to conclude, always remember that panaceas don't exist. Consider your own context, okay? Okay, decide for yourself. So the point is that you need to see different ways and basically think about the basic concepts and apply them depending on the context. And actually what he proposes, for instance, is a Git flow that actually say that if you don't have versions of code and all these things, try to avoid to have so many branches and do something more like you create a branch and you just include it here. So it's a simpler model where you add your commits, you open a pull request, you discuss and review, and then you deploy and integrate that. Okay, so that's the story of having something simpler. And another thing that is interesting that I want you to read is a very recent article. Actually, it's not yet finished, but it's almost finished. And I want you to read it because I think it's very, very, very relevant. That now looks at this from a different perspective. And the perspective is the difference between have a feature branching approach and a continuous delivery. And the changes are quite interesting the way you do it. And I think it's a nice way, or is a nice way to understand how actually the policies of the configuration management system have a high impact on the way you develop your code and you manage your team, okay, and you deliver your code. And we'll find the difference between, we'll find patterns like mainline, LC branch, and this is very close. So mainline is Steve Berzouk's mainline. Martin Fowler said that used the name from Steve Berzouk. And LC branch probably is close to the active development line, because it's the idea that you have an LC branch in the sense that you have tests that verify, but the main point, what is really enforcing here that is a bit different, is that if you keep your mainline really, really, really healthy, you do not need to have so many branches. And you can do something that is in maximum in the 1 day time integration. And he says that if you really go for a more feature branching model, then maybe this takes 1 month you just to implement a feature. And if it takes 1 month, the cost of merging is much higher. So it's interesting how, by distinguishing between what they call continuous integration and a feature model, so discussed comparing feature branching and continuous integration, actually this idea of what is the level of integration of these things, okay? The frequency of integration. And this is related with what is your policy of doing branching and integrating the branches, okay? And that's it. So read these patterns as well, because I think they will provide you a lot of insights. Okay, and I want you to read them and to relate with Steve Berzouk's approach and ideas, so that we can discuss this in class and then have the mini test. Okay, so enjoy.